The cool, chlorine-laced air carried the sound of laughter. A trespass. Splash. For the 10th time this week. They never saw her watching from the dark veranda, a phantom silhouette framed by the oppressive blackness of the night. They thought the high hedges and the silence of the neighborhood protected them. They thought it was a harmless secret, a midnight dip in a forgotten pool. But every debt is paid in full. Quick shot of a locked gate, then a close-up on a woman's intensely focused eyes, the reflection of the shimmering water making them look cold, hard, and final. A sound like a switch clicks. Tonight, the water is a trap. Part 1. The weight of chlorine and grief. The splash was the sound of a shattering illusion. It wasn't the sound of joy or summer freedom. To Evelyn Reed, it was the sound of disrespect, the tearing of the last threads of her fragile peace. It happened like clockwork, just after midnight, 3 times a week, sometimes 4. The muffled giggles, the low, conspiratorial shouts, the final, inevitable, defiant splash that sent echoes across her meticulously maintained but crushing estate. Evelyn was 59, and grief had aged her by a decade. 6 months ago, she was Mrs. Arthur Reed, the gracious, if somewhat reserved, mistress of the finest pre-war home on Sycamore Lane. Now she was just Evelyn, a woman drowning in maintenance bills and the chilling silence where Arthur's booming laugh used to reside. The house, all 4,000 square feet of it, felt less like a monument to a shared life and more like a mausoleum she was desperately trying to keep afloat. And the pool, that shimmering 50-foot expanse of turquoise, was the epicenter of her current anxiety. It was Arthur's pride and her heaviest burden, a shimmering blue hole sucking down money, chemicals, and now, her sanity. She stood motionless at the rail of her master bedroom balcony, wrapped in a thick cashmere robe. Below her, 4 distinct shadows, teenagers, she'd counted them, were cannonballing into the deep end. The pool light, which she hadn't bothered to turn on, made the disturbance look spectral, like ghosts playing in liquid moonlight. The first few times, she had tried the proper channels. Week 1, the note. A politely worded but firm letter, laminated and taped to the wrought iron gate. Private property. Surveillance in use. Trespassers will be reported. The following night, the note was gone, replaced by a half-empty can of cheap energy drink resting on the deck. Week 2, the call. She called the non-emergency police line. "It's midnight, ma'am. We have actual emergencies. Unless you've seen damage or violence, it's kids being kids. Try turning on the floodlights. Maybe they'll spook." She hung up, her hand trembling, feeling utterly dismissed. Week 3, the confrontation. She'd actually ventured downstairs, flipping the breaker for the massive deck lights. The sudden, brutal flood of halogen light froze them mid-splash. A boy, tall, with a shock of blonde hair, probably the leader, looked straight up at her, shielded his eyes, and yelled, "Chill, lady! Just having a swim! What are you gonna do, call our moms?" Then they simply climbed out, laughed, and scaled the back wall, leaving behind damp footprints and the scent of teen sweat on her pristine Italian tiles. Tonight was week 4, and the defiance had escalated. Yesterday, the pool filter pressure gauge had bottomed out, choked with leaves, dirt, and, inexplicably, a shredded baseball cap. The pool service technician, a bored young man named Kevin, had given her a grim diagnosis. "It's the chemicals, Mrs. Reed. When you get 4 teenagers in here, they throw off the pH balance in 5 minutes. And your filter media is shot. That's at least $4,000 for the repair, plus the cost of shock treatment. You need to secure this place. $4,000. That was the deductible for the insurance claim she couldn't afford to file. That was a month of Arthur's life insurance payout gone. That was the cost of a crime nobody cared about. The truth was, the financial weight of the property was crushing her. Arthur had left her comfortable, but the property taxes alone were astronomical. She'd been quietly speaking to a realtor, but she couldn't sell the house in this condition. Not with a damaged pool and the implicit liability of neighborhood brats using it as a public park. The damage wasn't just physical, it was financial. And more importantly, it was personal. She finally moved away from the railing, the chill of the air-conditioned room hitting the dampness on her face. She hadn't realized she was crying. But the tears were not of sorrow. They were of a cold, hardening resolve. She was not the frail, grieving widow they assumed. She was Evelyn Reed, and she was done being dismissed. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called since Arthur's passing, her insurance agent. "Mr. Harrison." He answered on the third ring, his voice professionally cheerful, instantly grating on her nerves. "Evelyn! To what do I owe the pleasure? Everything with the new policy squared away?" "No, Mr. Harrison, it's not. I am calling to discuss my liability policy, specifically regarding the repeated trespassers using my pool." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made her sound dangerously calm. "Ah, the teenage issue. Did you install the motion lights I suggested?" "I did. They are currently swimming under them. The lights are not a deterrent. They've become a spotlight for their nightly entertainment. Mr. Harrison, if one of these teenagers is hurt on my property, if they slip on the wet tiles, if they dive and hit their head, which is highly possible given their level of intoxication, Evelyn, please, don't speculate. Our policy is clear. You must demonstrate due diligence to mitigate risk. Have you posted clear signage? Have you installed a secondary lock? Have you called law enforcement?" "I have done all of that," Evelyn snapped, the control momentarily fracturing. "And law enforcement told me to spook them. What happens if I do catch them? If I have to physically detain them, am I covered if they claim assault?" Harrison sighed, a low, theatrical sound. "Evelyn, please be realistic. Don't engage. The best thing you can do is continue to document and file a comprehensive report for your own protection. We want proof that you are not negligent. But physically engaging? That is reckless and puts you at a greater risk of a civil suit. So, my only course of action is to stand here, watch them destroy my property, rack up bills, and pray they don't break their necks, turning my liability policy into a legal nightmare? Essentially, yes. Due process, Evelyn. Due diligence. Don't give them a reason to sue." He had inadvertently given her the exact push she needed. Don't give them a reason to sue. She ended the call without saying goodbye, the screen going dark in her hand. The system was designed to protect the trespasser, the entitled, the negligent. It protected the threat and penalized the victim who dared to defend their property. Evelyn walked into her walk-in closet, not for clothes, but for the safe tucked behind a stack of Arthur's old golf trophies. She spun the combination, 14-5-9. Inside, next to Arthur's will and a few pieces of jewelry, was a small, worn, leather-bound address book. It held the numbers of people Arthur had dealt with over the years, people who operated outside the purview of due process. She found the name she was looking for: Silas. Silas was a retired security consultant, a specialist in unconventional deterrence, who Arthur had hired once after a string of high-end equipment thefts at one of his construction sites. Silas hadn't filed a police report. He had simply made the site unpleasant to trespass. She called Silas. He answered with a gruff, alert voice. "Even at this hour." "Reed residence," she stated, her voice returning to that chilling calm. "Silas, it's Evelyn Reed, Arthur's wife." "Mrs. Reed, I'm sorry for your loss. What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath, watching the pool below. The blond boy, Mark, was now sitting on the edge, idly kicking water over the coping. "I have a recurring problem with trespassers. They are damaging my property and the legal channels are useless. I need a solution that is irreversible, non-injurious, but absolutely effective. I need them to pay a price that makes them never look at this pool again." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Non-injurious is key, Mrs. Reed. We don't want a felony. We want humiliation. We want a deterrent that is entirely lawful but carries a hefty social cost. What kind of damage are we looking at? Permanent? The kind that sticks to their skin. The kind that follows them to school. The kind that tells the whole neighborhood what they did without me having to say a word." Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Ah, retribution via social shame. I like it. Arthur always said you were tougher than you looked. I have just the thing. It's perfectly legal for pool owners, entirely non-toxic, but let's just say highly visible. Do you still have that locked shed near the pump housing? Yes. Excellent. You have a pool supply store nearby that's open late? Or perhaps a large agricultural supply store? I'm going to text you 2 names of chemicals. They're common, sold over the counter. I want you to mix them as per my instructions. You'll need gloves. You'll need a large bucket. And you'll need the timing to be impeccable. Evelyn felt a surge of exhilaration she hadn't felt since Arthur was alive. It wasn't the thrill of revenge, but the satisfaction of regained control. Send the text, Silas, and thank you. Within 20 minutes, she had driven to the all-night hardware and pool supply megastore, dressed in a black trench coat and sunglasses, feeling like a spy in a B-movie. She bought the 2 items Silas had specified. One was a highly concentrated common industrial dye, the type used to detect leaks in air. The magenta handprint on the white coping glared under the harsh morning sun, a stark symbol of Evelyn's victory and her failure. The air still carried the faint synthetic scent of industrial dye. Evelyn stood on the veranda sipping coffee, feeling the exhaustion of the night before, but also a cold, brittle satisfaction. Her pool was ruined, a radioactive magenta eye in the center of her perfectly manicured lawn, but the silence was exquisite. The boys hadn't returned. The debt had been paid, or so she thought. The first crack in her piece arrived at 8:17 a.m. in the form of a screaming cherry-red convertible screeching to a halt at her curb. The driver's side door flung open, and Mrs. Carol Davies, a woman Evelyn knew only by reputation as the most aggressively litigious mother in the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association, emerged. Carol, a study in expensive athleisure and aggressive volume, marched up the driveway, followed closely by her son, Ethan, one of the 4 trespassers. Ethan was the color of a faded bruise, magenta in his hair, around his ears and streaked down his neck where he'd clearly tried to scrub furiously. He looked miserable, humiliated, and worst of all for Evelyn, terrified. "Evelyn Reed!" Carol shrieked, stopping just short of the pristine lawn. "You demented old woman! Look at my son! Look at him!" She grabbed Ethan's magenta-streaked arm and thrust it forward. Evelyn, still in her cashmere robe, met her at the top of the steps, holding her coffee cup as though it contained a thermonuclear device. Her expression was utterly serene. "Good morning, Carol," Evelyn said, her voice soft but carrying. "I see your son had an unfortunate late-night swimming accident in my private pool. It's been happening for weeks, you know. I tried to warn the parents, but apparently communication is difficult in this neighborhood." "Accident? This is a chemical assault! He's been poisoned!" "We were up all night with the emergency room doctor who said he'd never seen anything like it. The dye has bonded to his keratin. He's going to miss the school photos. This is criminal negligence, Evelyn. You put some kind of toxic sludge in that water." "The dye is non-toxic industrial grade, commonly used to trace municipal water leaks. And the pH agent is simply a pool stabilizer," Evelyn corrected calmly. "My pool service noted significant chemical imbalance due to repeated contamination, leaves, dirt, and as you can see, unsupervised teenagers. I applied a highly concentrated pH shock to sanitize the water before I realized they were still on the property. What happened next, Carol, was the result of your son, Ethan, trespassing on private property, past numerous warning signs, and voluntarily immersing himself in a body of water that had just been dosed for sanitation." Ethan winced, shuffling his feet. His mother's fury was a spectacle, but Evelyn's icy logic was a sudden, cold reality. "Don't you dare try to spin this into our fault," Carol hissed, her face flushed. "You targeted them. You watched them, and you deliberately did this. Ethan is going to see a therapist for trauma, and you, Evelyn, will pay for every single minute of it. You will pay for his medical bills, his psychological distress, and the cost of replacing every single piece of magenta-stained clothing he owns. I am calling my lawyer now. You can expect a summons by lunchtime." Carol pivoted dramatically and stormed back to her car, Ethan scrambling after her, the shame of his magenta-stained hair compounding the sting of his mother's theatrics. Evelyn watched them leave, the fear that had been dormant finally prickling her skin. A lawsuit. Silas had promised legal non-liability. But Carol Davies was the kind of woman who considered a slightly undercooked croissant grounds for litigation. She went back inside and immediately called Silas. "The mothers are here," she reported. standing over the kitchen counter, the white marble feeling cold beneath her fingers. Specifically, Carol Davies. She's threatening a lawsuit for chemical assault and trauma. Silas sounded unconcerned. They can threaten all they want, Mrs. Reed. The fact remains, they were trespassers. Their lawyer will tell them the same thing mine told me. The liability shield is strong when the victim is the aggressor. You've documented your attempts to use conventional means. You didn't bait a trap. You performed pool maintenance at a highly irregular time due to property damage. The case is flimsy. They're relying on your fear. I am not afraid of their lawyer, Evelyn said, staring out at the magenta pool. I am afraid of this. She hung up and called Kevin, the pool technician. He arrived an hour later, looking at the pool as if it were a crime scene. Mrs. Reed, Kevin said, rubbing his temple. What in God's name did you put in here? This is spectacular. It's an industrial piping dye and a high-grade pH stabilizer. Silas assured me it was non-toxic. It's non-toxic, yes. It's also indelible. Do you know what this stuff is designed for? To bond to concrete and soil so thoroughly that water flowing over it can't wash it away. Your pool walls, your plaster, your grout, they've all absorbed it. Evelyn felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Can you drain it and scrub it? We could. But the plaster is porous. It'll be mottled pink forever. To properly remove this dye, we have to acid wash the plaster, then replaster the entire pool. Mrs. Reed, this is not a $4,000 fix anymore. This is a full pool renovation. We're talking $45,000 to $60,000, easy. Evelyn leaned against the warm stone column, her vision blurring slightly. $60,000. She hadn't just made them pay a price. She had inadvertently bankrupted herself in the process. The victory suddenly tasted like ash. This was the true, unforeseen consequence of operating outside the system. The consequences are entirely your own. I can start draining it today, Kevin offered, shaking his head slowly. But I need a check for the initial $5,000 to cover the equipment rental and chemical disposal. This water can't just go into the storm drain. She wrote the check, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoing her own escalating dread. She paid a fortune to save herself from a $4,000 repair, and now she was facing a $60,000 rebuild and a potentially damaging lawsuit. This wasn't justice. It was an ironic, self-inflicted wound. Later that afternoon, a process server, a small, sweaty man in a cheap suit, delivered the summons. It was an order to appear in civil court, citing chemical exposure, battery, due to her physical action with the skimmer pole, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, naming her as the sole defendant. The lead plaintiff was not Carol Davies, but Mr. Robert Ashton. The name froze Evelyn. Robert Ashton wasn't just a parent. He was a highly successful, politically connected personal injury lawyer whose son, Leo, was the fourth boy Evelyn had identified. Ashton was a shark known for his relentless, high-profile lawsuits. He wasn't looking for a settlement. He was looking for a spectacle, a warning to the neighborhood, and a hefty fee. He was using his son as a shield and a weapon. Evelyn sat down at Arthur's old mahogany desk, the summons spread out before her. She was now truly in a war, not with teenagers, but with a professional combatant who played the system better than anyone. She needed a lawyer, and she knew exactly which one Arthur would have used. Ms. Vivian Sharp, a defense attorney known for her brutal efficiency and refusal to lose. Before calling, Evelyn picked up the shredded baseball cap that Kevin had pulled from the filter yesterday, the object that had initially confirmed the severe damage. It was still damp, smelling faintly of dye and chlorine. She turned it over, examining the embroidered logo. It wasn't a common baseball team. It was the stylized, block-lettered logo of the local private academy, Northwood Prep. She walked over to the windows overlooking the pool, where the draining process had begun, revealing the shockingly pink-stained plaster. She looked down at the handprint on the coping, and then back at the cap. Suddenly a realization, chilling and sharp, pierced through the financial dread. The teenagers who had been coming to her pool for weeks were not just local kids seeking thrills. They were from Northwood Prep. The tuition alone was over $30,000 a year. They weren't just entitled. They were wealthy, privileged, and had absolutely no reason to seek out a random, unsecured pool in the middle of the night. Their homes, Evelyn knew, all had pools. She had assumed they were local nuisances. Now she understood they were conducting an intentional, prolonged campaign. They were slumming it, daring each other, treating her and her property as a game, a challenge. She looked at the summons again. Robert Ashton. His son was Leo. Leo was known for being a merciless bully at Northwood. Evelyn picked up the phone to call Vivian Sharp, but before she could dial, her eyes fell on the shredded baseball cap again. There was something else sewn on the brim, almost invisible against the dark fabric. She pulled out a magnifying glass from the desk drawer. It was a single, tiny, faded stitch of orange thread barely visible, shaped like a small R. The R stood for Reed, Arthur's company. It was an old hat, one of the original promotional items Arthur had given out 20 years ago when he founded his firm. A specific, rare piece of memorabilia. How did these boys get Arthur's personal company hat? Did they take it from the property when they were first trespassing? Or had they been here before? Evelyn felt the air drain from the room. These weren't random trespassers. They knew this house. They knew Arthur. Just as she was about to call her lawyer, her front gate opened. It wasn't the process server this time. It was a sleek black sedan. Out stepped Robert Ashton, Leo's father, the aggressive. Robert Ashton's words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, solidifying the terror that had been building since the first splash. "This house is mine!" Evelyn didn't move. The chill of the air conditioning, which had been comforting moments before, now felt like the icy grip of absolute dispossession. She stared at the key in Ashton's hand, then at his face, a mask of practiced, professional superiority. He wasn't a neighbor or a lawyer seeking a settlement. He was an executioner. "You're lying," Evelyn whispered, the denial a desperate, thin barrier against the flood of reality. "Arthur would never—" "Arthur did," Ashton cut in, stepping fully across the threshold, symbolically erasing her residency. He clicked the lock into place behind him. "A quick-close private sale 6 months ago. The deed transfer was finalized 2 weeks before his passing. Your signature is nowhere on the document, Evelyn. It's a clean sole proprietor sale. He had every legal right. I offered a 6-month lease back, non-renewable, so you could transition. That lease expired yesterday." He looked past her, toward the massive portrait of Arthur hanging over the fireplace. Arthur, robust and smiling, oblivious to the betrayal he had orchestrated. "He didn't want you to worry while he was unwell. He was a sentimental man, Arthur, but also a pragmatic one. He knew the upkeep on this place would sink you. He made a difficult choice." Evelyn's mind raced, discarding the lies and grasping at the truth. Arthur had been diagnosed with aggressive cancer, yes, but he had been lucid, calculating, and absolutely secretive about his finances in the final year. She hadn't even known he'd hired Silas. "I am Arthur's sole beneficiary," Evelyn countered, finding her voice, a sudden sharp clarity cutting through her shock. "Any major asset sale would be subject to probate review. I never saw the funds from this alleged sale." Ashton smiled, a thin, humorless curve of the mouth. "Of course you didn't, Evelyn. The funds went directly into liquidating certain problematic corporate assets, which I believe Arthur preferred to keep quiet. As for the probate, it was finalized last month. Everything was clean. The house wasn't his to give to you. It was mine. And the sale agreement included a clause, a non-disclosure penalty, that ensured you, or anyone else, wouldn't challenge the terms for 6 months. The pieces slammed together. Arthur's sudden mood swings, the constant phone calls he took in the study with the door locked, the inexplicable erosion of their comfortable savings. And now the trespassers. "The boys," Evelyn breathed, the connection snapping into place. "Your son Leo and the others. They weren't just random kids. You knew they were coming here, didn't you? You sent them. This whole performance, the trespassing, the damage, the lawsuit. It was all a manufactured incident to give you the legal pretext to void the lease and throw me out early." Ashton's face finally lost its professional cool, replaced by a momentary flash of smug satisfaction. "It certainly accelerated the process, didn't it? After all, you did chemically assault my son on my property, which you were merely renting. The lease is voided for vandalism and breach of fiduciary duty. I'll send a moving crew in the morning. Take what you need now, Evelyn. Just the small items. He pulled a document from his inner jacket pocket, a slick, pristine photocopy of a signed notice to vacate. He tossed it onto the dark mahogany desk where she had just minutes ago been reviewing the summons. The irony was a physical blow. She had fought so hard to protect what she believed was hers, only to destroy it with her own hands in the service of her aggressor's plan. The $60,000 pool repair was now his problem, but the house, her security, was gone. "You didn't just buy the house, Ashton," Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on the man who had effortlessly ruined her. "You bought my husband's silence. Why? What did Arthur do that required the silence, the secrecy, and this level of elaborate cleanup?" Ashton simply adjusted his tie. "That, Evelyn, is a matter of client-attorney privilege that expired with your husband. All you need to concern yourself with is the fact that you have 3 hours to pack personal effects before I change the locks. Good day." He turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps echoing through the hollow expanse of his hallway. 3 hours later, Evelyn was sitting in the opulent, dimly lit office of Vivian Sharp. Evelyn's entire life, or what she considered her life, was packed into 2 suitcases and a small, antique safe box that held the address book and the baseball cap. Vivian Sharp, a woman with the severe beauty of a predator and a mind like a razor blade, listened without interruption as Evelyn recounted the chaotic events, ending with Ashton's eviction. "Let me summarize. Evelyn," Vivian said, leaning back, the dark leather of her chair creaking slightly. "You chemically vandalized a $60,000 pool, which, ironically, you are now being sued for damaging, on a property that was no longer yours. You were served a lawsuit by the new owner for battery and trauma, and then simultaneously evicted from the residence by that same owner. The root of this entire disaster is an alleged property sale orchestrated by your deceased husband 6 months ago, with the funds disappearing into a confidential corporate matter." Vivian sighed, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "On the surface, Mrs. Reed, this is not a lawsuit. It's a controlled demolition of your life. Mr. Ashton, being a master of civil law, has performed a classic legal squeeze play. The lawsuit gives him the moral high ground for the eviction, and the eviction cuts you off from the evidence." Evelyn pushed the shredded Northwood Prep baseball cap and the notice to vacate across the desk. "I need you to fight the sale, Vivian. Arthur was ill. He couldn't have been competent. And I need to know why Ashton's son and his friends were harassing us for weeks. It's too coincidental. They weren't just kids. They were Ashton's pawns." Vivian picked up the hat, turning the embroidered R over in her fingers. "Northwood Prep, Robert Ashton. This points to something far deeper than a simple real estate transaction, Evelyn. Ashton doesn't play games for fun. He plays them for cover. The house sale and the lawsuit are a distraction. We need to focus on what Arthur was hiding. What do we do first?" "First, we stall the eviction. I'll file an emergency injunction tomorrow, citing insufficient notice and the question of Arthur's competency at the time of signing. We won't win the house back yet, but it gives us time. Second, we countersue for trespass and harassment. We make Ashton prove that his children's actions were innocent." Vivian tapped the baseball cap. "And third, we followed the money, or in this case, the debt. That missing sale revenue didn't just vanish. It went to a large liability that Ashton or his client was holding over Arthur. Arthur sold his home to pay for silence. We need to find the recipient of those funds." Evelyn, displaced and facing destitution, suddenly felt a flicker of the fighter Arthur used to praise. "I have something else. Arthur's safe deposit box. I have the key, but the bank won't let me access it without proof of a specific search warrant or court order." "That's because Arthur planned this," Vivian murmured, leaning forward, her eyes narrowing in intellectual excitement. "He put something in there he didn't want you or Ashton to easily find. I can get a temporary order, but it will take 48 hours. Until then, you need to be safe, Evelyn. Ashton knows you're the loose thread." Vivian arranged for Evelyn to stay at an anonymous upscale hotel downtown, far from the neighborhood. As Evelyn waited for the car, she realized she was not just fighting for a house or money. She was fighting the ghost of her husband, who had decided her fate months ago, leaving her to clean up the fallout. 2 days later, Vivian secured the court order, and Evelyn, accompanied by a police escort and Vivian, entered the sterile, temperature-controlled vault of the bank. Arthur's safe deposit box was a heavy, dull brass thing. Inside, there was no large contract or ledger of accounts. There were only 3 items: a handwritten letter, sealed in an envelope addressed to Evelyn, a small, micro SD card, a photograph, not of Evelyn or their family, but a faded 20-year-old picture of 4 young boys, about 10 years old, standing proudly next to a newly completed, pristine swimming pool. One of those boys was a young Robert Ashton, clearly recognizable despite the years. The pool was Evelyn's. The photo was taken the day the pool was finished, 2 decades ago. Evelyn ignored the letter for a moment, pulling out the micro SD card. "What is this?" Vivian handed a forensic reader to the accompanying officer. "We need to find out. This is where Arthur buried the truth." The officer slotted the card into the reader. The screen flashed, displaying a single encrypted file labeled Sycamore Debt. "It's password protected," the officer stated. "Military-grade encryption." Evelyn suddenly felt a wave of nausea. Arthur, a man who built infrastructure, not software, had used military-grade encryption to hide a debt file. She looked down at the old photograph. "The boys, the pool, the R on the cap. It all dated back to when Arthur's company was first starting out. The boys in the picture, Vivian," Evelyn pointed. "They're the fathers of the teenagers who were in my pool. They were there on the day it opened." She finally picked up the letter from Arthur, tearing the seal. His familiar, elegant handwriting swam before her eyes. "My dearest E, if you are reading this, I'm gone, and the worst has happened. I tried to clean it up. I had to sell the house to Robert Ashton to prevent him from burying us both. He didn't just want the house, E. He wanted to..." The title on the screen, Project Concrete Tomb 1999 Fatal Accident Report, was a gut punch of reality. The officer, Vivian Sharp, and Evelyn stared at the horrific, unambiguous truth that had been buried for 26 years. Vivian didn't wait. "Officer, start a preliminary file transfer now. Every second that passes is a risk." Evelyn, ignoring them, scrolled down the electronic document, her trembling fingers magnifying the text on the small reader screen. The report, detailed and clinical, was Arthur's confession. The date was August 17th, 1999. Arthur's company, Reed Infrastructure, was racing to finish the Sycamore Lane pool, a showcase project for the wealthy client, which, ironically, turned out to be Arthur himself. The report detailed a massive, hurried concrete pour for the pool's deep-end foundation. That night, a young, undocumented laborer named Gabriel Morales, just 17, was working a grueling double shift. He fell. The report was blunt. He slipped on slick rebar and fell headfirst into the 10-foot-deep, rapidly setting concrete mold. Arthur had been on site. The crew, mostly immigrant laborers desperate not to call attention to themselves, panicked. Arthur, fearing corporate collapse, manslaughter charges, and the ruin of his reputation, made a monstrous decision. He ordered the other workers, under threat of deportation and financial ruin, to keep pouring. They sealed the boy beneath the foundation of the newly designed, pristine pool. The final entry in the report was a chilling inventory. 1-1, custom-poured 50-foot residential foundation, sealed. 1-1 casualty unrecovered. Financial settlement, $50,000 to ensure primary crew silence. Secondary liability secured via Robert Ashton, legal counsel. Evelyn dropped the reader onto the table. It clattered against the brass deposit box, the sound echoing in the sterile vault. Her husband, the gracious, booming, respectable Arthur, was a killer. The love she had built her life upon was rooted in a foundation of cement and death. Vivian, having scanned the summary, looked at Evelyn, her usual cool professionalism strained by shock. The house wasn't sold to Ashton, Evelyn, it was collateral. Ashton wasn't just his lawyer, he was the cleanup crew. Arthur liquidated the asset he had tainted to Ashton, ensuring the title, and therefore the liability, stayed in friendly, controlling hands. Ashton bought the pool to prevent anyone from ever digging it up. The money Arthur gave Ashton was likely a final payment to Gabriel Morales' family, or perhaps to the original crew, handled by Ashton to keep Arthur's name clean. "The photograph," Evelyn whispered. pointing to the image of the 4 young men, Ashton and the other fathers. They were there. They were young, part of the crew or complicit friends. They were the ones who kept pouring. The light dawned, cold and hard. The teenage boys trespassing in the pool, Mark, Ethan, and Ashton's son, Leo, weren't just playing a prank. They were the next generation, drawn to the sight of the secret their fathers had buried. Perhaps they knew fragments of the truth. Perhaps they were looking for evidence, or perhaps the sheer weight of the lie compelled them to literally dive into the consequence. The R-hat, Arthur's, must have been dropped by the victim or left behind during the frantic cover-up. A piece of evidence Leo had found while swimming. The police officer, a young woman named Miller, looked up from the data transfer. "Mrs. Reed, this is not a civil matter. This is evidence of a capital crime, a homicide and massive corporate fraud. This file goes to the district attorney's office immediately." "No," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, instantly reclaiming control. She knew that if this went to the DA, Ashton would use every legal tool to bury the file, and they would both be lost in the procedural battle. "Not yet, Officer Miller. This is my leverage. If we hand this over, Ashton will deny everything, claim it's a forgery, and leave me destitute in the process." Vivian nodded slowly, her mind working through the legal chessboard. "Evelyn is right. Ashton is a defense attorney. He will claim attorney-client privilege, that Arthur was fabricating documents, and he'll have us tied up in motions for 5 years. We have to use this weapon to cut a deal now while he thinks he has the upper hand." Evelyn felt a desperate, focused clarity. She was fighting for her home, but more importantly for the justice Gabriel Morales never received, and for the life that Arthur's betrayal had stolen. "I want the house back," Evelyn stated. "I want full restitution for the damage they caused, and I want a signed, notarized confession from Robert Ashton that he manufactured the trespassing and the lawsuit to evict me." "He'll never confess to that," Vivian countered. "He'll confess to what's in the document, his role as corporate counsel covering up the accident. And in exchange for my silence, I want the full amount Arthur sold the house for, plus the cost of the pool renovation, placed in an escrow account managed by you, Evelyn, to be used for the legal defense and the eventual fund for the Morales family." Evelyn listened, her heart aching for the boy under the concrete. No, the house and the money, but on one condition. The Morales family must be contacted immediately after the deal is signed. They must be given the choice to proceed with this information. Vivian set the trap. She called Robert Ashton and requested an immediate in-person meeting, alone, at a neutral location, the law library of the county courthouse, in 1 hour. Evelyn, now armed with the encrypted flash drive and the letter, waited in the courthouse lobby. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall, no longer a grieving widow or a furious homeowner, but a soldier prepared for final battle. Ashton arrived, confident and punctual. He looked past Evelyn, addressing Vivian with cool disdain. "I don't know why we're here, Sharp. The eviction notice is served. I'm taking possession tomorrow. Any further meeting should be through litigation, which, judging by your client's criminal vandalism, is a guaranteed win for me." Vivian smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Sit down, Mr. Ashton. We are not here to discuss the pH balance of your pool or the petty vandalism of your delinquent son. We are here to discuss the criminal liability of your deceased former client, Arthur Reed, and your long-standing role as the complicit corporate counsel." Vivian placed 2 items on the polished mahogany table between them. The faded photograph of the 4 young men at the pool opening, and the small black micro SD card. Ashton's composure shattered instantly. He looked at the SD card as if it were a ticking bomb. His face went white, the blood draining from his lips. "Where did you get that?" His voice was a rasp, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "It's from Arthur's safe deposit box," Evelyn interjected, her voice steady. "The password was my name. It contains the Project Concrete Tomb, 1999 Fatal Accident Report, detailing the death of Gabriel Morales beneath the deep end of the Sycamore Lane pool, and your corporate cover-up." Ashton leaned back, his eyes darting frantically around the empty library, calculating the exposure. The threat wasn't a civil suit. It was a RICO investigation, disbarment, and jail time. This is baseless forgery, Ashton spat, but his denial was weak, hollow. It's slander. I'll have you both arrested. You won't, Evelyn finished for him, leaning across the table closer than she should. Because I know your son, Leo, and his friends were in that pool looking for confirmation of the secret you forced their fathers to keep. You sent them there, Robert, to remind them of the debt. The pool was your grave marker, and you bought the house to keep it quiet. Vivian pushed a legal folder across the table. It contained a single sheet, a contract for the immediate transfer of the Sycamore Lane property back to Evelyn Reed, signed by Robert Ashton for the price of $1. It also included a detailed agreement for a $750,000 escrow fund for restitution and property damage, and a complete notarized confession of Ashton's role in the cover-up. Here is the deal. Mr. Ashton, Vivian stated, her voice cold steel, you sign this contract in the confession. You transfer the deed and the funds. The SD card goes into a secure third-party vault, and the case remains dormant, protecting your son, your wife, and the other fathers who were forced into this with Arthur. If you refuse, Officer Miller, who is currently parked outside this building, will have a copy of the report, and the DA will be opening an investigation into homicide and corporate conspiracy before the end of the hour. Ashton stared at the document, his empire collapsing in real time. He looked from Vivian's unblinking, assured gaze to Evelyn's determined, vengeful eyes. His legal maneuver had backfired, turning an act of vandalism into the exposure of a quarter-century-old crime. He had gambled on Evelyn's weakness and lost everything to her resolve. He reached for the pen, but just as he did, Evelyn slipped the single, damning photograph of the 4 boys in front of the new pool out from under the contract and slid it toward him. One more thing. Robert, Evelyn said, ensuring her final demand was the one that landed heaviest. You will also publicly confess that you fabricated the entire story of the children trespassing and the lawsuit to wrongfully evict a grieving widow. I want my name and my reputation publicly cleaned. Ashton hesitated, the full weight of the public humiliation a monstrous burden. He looked at the picture of his younger, innocent self, then at the pen and then at Evelyn, who had turned a magenta swimming pool into his undoing, with a defeated, broken sigh that sounded like the end of his career. Robert Ashton picked up the pen and signed the contract, sealing his O. Robert Ashton didn't walk out of the county law library. He retreated. His footsteps were measured, no longer carrying the aggressive confidence of a legal titan, but the hollow echo of a defeated man. He left behind a stack of signed documents that confirmed Evelyn's ownership of the Sycamore Lane house, established a 7-figure escrow fund for restitution and property damage, and, most damningly, contained his notarized confession of corporate complicity and fraud. Vivian Sharp gathered the papers, her movements precise. He's gone, Evelyn. He's finished. The civil suits against you are dissolved. The house is legally yours, and the funds are secure. She looked at the micro SD card, now sealed in an evidence bag. The next step is the DA. We fulfill your promise to Gabriel Morales' family, and then we turn this evidence over, letting justice take its course against the other fathers and anyone else involved. Evelyn finally felt the tension leave her body, replaced by a profound shaking exhaustion. They drove back to Sycamore Lane in silence. The house felt different. It was no longer a beautiful prison of grief, nor a symbol of financial desperation. It was a site of crime, a monument to a lie that had devoured her life for 26 years. The pool, half drained, lay exposed. The magnificent magenta-stained plaster seemed to weep, revealing the raw concrete shell beneath. Evelyn walked to the deep end, where the water was just a shallow, lurid pink puddle. She looked down at the concrete floor, the concrete tomb. That evening, Evelyn sat at Arthur's old desk. Vivian had handled the initial contact with the Morales family. Gabriel's younger sister, Elena, who was only a child when he disappeared, was now a woman in her 40s, still searching, still hoping. Evelyn picked up Arthur's final letter again. She hadn't read past the first lines. She opened it and read the rest, searching not for love but for context. I couldn't live with it, E. Not anymore. I tried to buy the silence, but the guilt was in the foundation. I knew Ashton would find a way to take the house once I was gone, but I had to protect you from the secret buried within the asset. The boys, Leo, Mark, Ethan, they were trespassing because Ashton was testing the structural integrity, seeing if the foundation could be secretly destroyed without exposing the truth. They were looking for the R-cap, a final piece of evidence Gabriel dropped. I'm sorry I destroyed our marriage with my fear. I love you, and I pray the insurance money is enough to start fresh, somewhere far from here. Please, E, don't dig up the past. Let me take the secret with me. Sell the house, walk away, and find peace. The letter confirmed her greatest fears and justified her actions. Arthur hadn't sold the house to spite her. He had sold it to bury the truth forever, hoping the sheer financial burden would keep the pool undisturbed. Evelyn realized she hadn't just fought Robert Ashton. She had fought her own husband's dying wish. Don't dig up the past. But the past wasn't hers to bury. It belonged to Gabriel Morales. Evelyn called Vivian, her decision firm. I don't care about the house anymore. I don't care about the resale value. The price of keeping this secret is too high. The house must be returned to the state it was meant to be in, empty ground. We will use the funds Ashton provided for one purpose, excavation. The spectacle began 3 days later. In the meticulously manicured gardens of Sycamore Lane, the sound of birdsong was replaced by the deafening roar of industrial machinery. Evelyn had secured the necessary permits, claiming a massive, unavoidable structural failure in the pool's foundation. Ashton, now silent and reeling from his professional disaster, could not interfere. The neighborhood watched, aghast, as the massive claw of a hydraulic excavator tore into the concrete shell of the beautiful magenta pool. The pool servicemen, who had been baffled by the die, now stood silently, exchanging grim glances with the police detectives and forensic teams that Vivian had brought in. The digging was slow, agonizing work, each scrape of the steel blade against the reinforced concrete, a scream of deferred justice. Evelyn, dressed simply in black, stood under the shadow of her massive oak tree, flanked by Vivian. She watched, motionless, as the machine chewed through the years of accumulated lies. The neighbors, including Carol Davies, peered from their windows, whispering about Evelyn's supposed mental breakdown. She won a fortune, and she's destroying the whole house, they muttered, oblivious to the horrific truth unfolding. Finally, the excavator hit the 10-foot depth of the original pour. The forensic team took over, using specialized equipment to break through the final, thick layer of 1999 concrete. At 4:45 p.m., a hush fell over the site. The detectives conferred with a forensic pathologist. Evelyn walked forward, her shoes crunching on the shattered concrete shards. There, sealed within the heart of the foundation, still wrapped in the remnants of a faded uniform and the last desperate grasp of his young life, was the body of Gabriel Morales. The pool had been his final resting place, the luxury of the Sycamore Lane elite literally built upon the sacrifice of the forgotten. The recovery was meticulous and respectful. As Gabriel's remains were finally lifted from the earth, the late afternoon sun casting long, heavy shadows, Elena Morales, standing quietly beside Evelyn, simply wept. She didn't rage or shout. She placed a small, framed photo of her smiling brother onto the exposed concrete lip of the pit. The house was forever marked. The pool was gone, replaced by a massive, empty, 10-foot-deep pit in the ground. That night, Evelyn walked through the empty, echoing house. She was no longer Arthur's wife. She was the witness and the instrument of justice. The consequences of her initial rash act of revenge, the magenta dye, had led her to this moment, forcing her to pay the ultimate price for her husband's sins, the complete destruction of the life and home they had built together. She called Vivian. List the house, as is, with the hole. Evelyn, no one will buy a house with a fresh grave on the property, Vivian protested. They won't, Evelyn agreed, looking out at the enormous empty pit that used to be the centerpiece of Sycamore Lane. But the land is valuable. The price will reflect the reality. The concrete tomb is exposed, and the moral debt is paid. She looked at the empty, silent ground where the pool had been. The teenagers who kept sneaking in, looking for their father's secrets, had finally paid the price in humiliation and fear. But Evelyn and the legacy of the Reed name paid the final, deepest price, the foundation of her entire life, destroyed for the sake of the truth. The next morning, Evelyn placed the final sign on the now empty, dirt-covered gate. It wasn't the polite note from Part 1, nor the aggressive legal notice from Part 2. It was a simple sign from the municipal demolition crew, listing the date and the cause of the destruction. It read, "Site cleared. Structure deemed unsound.